Welcome to GhostMire, where every night a new horror story drags you deeper than the last. Before anything else, hit subscribe right now. If you miss even one night, you'll miss the piece that connects all these stories into something far darker. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know exactly who's awake inside the dark with us, and listen carefully. This story has something hidden. A moment so disturbing, so unexpected that most people don't recognize it until the very end. If you leave early, you'll never know what really happened. So stay with me, all the way to the final second. Story number 1, The Frozen Convoy. Marcus Chen had been driving cross-country rigs for 17 years, and he'd seen his share of brutal winter conditions. But the ice storm that hit Interstate 80 through Nebraska on February 14, 2019, was different from anything he'd experienced. The weather reports had warned of freezing rain, but Marcus was hauling perishable pharmaceuticals that couldn't wait. He figured his experience would get him through. The ice started falling around 9 p.m. just past Grand Island. Within 20 minutes, the highway transformed into a skating rink. Marcus downshifted, crawling at 15 miles per hour, his wipers struggling against the accumulating sleet. The CB radio crackled, with other drivers reporting jackknifed trucks and multi-vehicle pileups ahead. That's when Marcus noticed the convoy. 6 identical white semi-trucks appeared in his mirrors, moving in perfect formation despite the treacherous conditions. They maintained the same speed, the same distance between each vehicle, like they were connected by invisible chains. Marcus tried raising them on the CB, cycling through channels, but got only static. The lead truck pulled alongside him. Marcus glanced over, expecting to see the driver maybe exchange a wave of solidarity in the dangerous conditions. The cab was empty. No driver, no movement. Just the steering wheel turning itself, adjusting to the curves of the highway. Marcus's hands tightened on his own wheel. He told himself it was the ice on his windows, the distortion from the freezing rain, playing tricks with the light. But when the second truck passed, it too had an empty cab. Then the third, the fourth, all driverless, moving with mechanical precision through conditions that were forcing experienced drivers like himself to near stops. The temperature gauge on Marcus's dashboard began dropping rapidly. 32 degrees, 28, 20. The heater was running full blast, but frost started forming on the inside of his windows. His breath came out in thick white clouds. The 6th truck pulled directly in front of him, its brake lights never illuminating, maintaining a constant speed that Marcus found himself matching involuntarily. His truck's engine began to struggle. The RPMs fluctuated wildly despite his steady pressure on the accelerator. The convoy was somehow pulling him along, and Marcus realized with growing horror that he couldn't slow down. When he tried to brake, his foot pressed the pedal, but nothing happened. The convoy was controlling his vehicle. They drove like this for 40 minutes, though Marcus's clock seemed to disagree, showing only 7 minutes had passed. The other traffic had disappeared. The highway stretched empty in both directions except for the ghost convoy and Marcus's truck. The ice continued falling, now so thick he could barely see 20 feet ahead, yet the convoy never wavered. Then Marcus saw them. People standing along the shoulder of the highway, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were covered in ice, completely encased in thick frozen shells, standing at attention like crystalline statues. But their eyes moved. Every single one of them tracked Marcus's truck as he passed, their gaze following him with desperate awareness. They were alive inside those frozen prisons. The CB suddenly roared to life with overlapping voices, all saying the same thing. "Don't stop! Don't ever stop! Keep moving or you'll freeze with us. We stopped. We're still here. Still waiting. Don't stop." Marcus wanted to scream, but fear had locked his throat. The convoy began to accelerate, forcing Marcus's truck faster despite the deadly ice. 50 miles per hour, 60. The wheels should have lost all traction, sent him spinning into oblivion, but something was keeping him glued to the highway. A rest area appeared ahead. The convoy trucks peeled off one by one, exiting in perfect synchronization. As the last truck left the highway, control of Marcus's vehicle suddenly returned. He slammed the brakes, fishtailing wildly before coming to a shuddering stop on the shoulder. The ice storm had ended. The highway ahead was merely wet, not frozen. The temperature gauge read 45 degrees. Marcus's GPS showed he'd traveled 247 miles in what his clock insisted was 12 minutes. The date on his dashboard display read February 17th. 3 days had passed. Marcus pulled into the next truck stop and didn't drive again for 2 months. Other drivers reported seeing the frozen people along I-80 during ice storms, always in the same locations, always with those moving, pleading eyes. The authorities found nothing, but Marcus knows they're there, waiting inside their ice tombs, warning drivers not to make the same mistake they did. He never learned what that mistake was, and he never wants to find out. Story number 2, The Ice Whispers. Dakota Martinez was a regional hauler for a lumber company running loads through the northern forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She'd grown up in Marquette. Ice storms were her childhood, and she respected winter's power but never feared it. On January 8, 2021, she picked up a load of treated timber in Escanaba, heading west toward Ironwood on Highway 2. The ice storm. Warnings came through her phone around 4 p.m. Dakota considered waiting it out, but the delivery was time-sensitive, and she knew these roads like she knew her own face in the mirror. She'd driven them in worse conditions, or so she believed. The freezing rain began as she passed through Crystal Falls, light at first, just enough to make the trees glitter in her headlights. By the time Dakota reached the Ottawa National Forest, the ice was falling in sheets. The trees on both sides of the highway groaned under the accumulating weight, branches snapping with sounds like gunshots. Dakota reduced her speed to a crawl, her focus absolute on the road ahead. The radio started acting strange around 6 p.m., switching stations on its own, cycling through static and fragments of songs that seemed decades old. Then she heard the whispers. At first, Dakota thought it was interference, wind noise against the microphone of a CB transmission. But the sounds were too clear, too articulate. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, speaking in hushed tones just below the threshold of understanding. They seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, from the speakers, from the vents, from the very metal of her truck's frame. Dakota turned off the radio. The whispers continued, growing louder. They were speaking her name now, drawing it out in long, frozen syllables. Dakota. She checked her mirrors, seeing nothing but the dark forest and the curtain of ice falling endlessly from the black sky. The temperature inside her cab was dropping despite the heater running at maximum. Her breath crystallized in the air, hanging in small clouds that didn't dissipate. The whispers began forming coherent sentences. They were warnings. The ice takes everyone eventually. It's patient. It waits inside you. We're all inside now. Come inside. It's warmer here. Come inside where we are. Dakota's hands began to ache from gripping the wheel. Looking down, she saw ice crystals forming on her skin, spreading from her fingertips up toward her wrists like creeping frost on a window. She tried to let go of the wheel, but her hands wouldn't respond. The ice was bonding her to the truck, making her part of it. The highway ahead began to change. The pavement looked different, older somehow, and the reflective lane markers were disappearing beneath the accumulating ice. Dakota realized with mounting terror that the forest was closing in. Trees that had been 50 feet from the road were now 20 feet away. Then 10. The highway was narrowing, being reclaimed by the wilderness. A figure emerged from the tree line, standing directly in Dakota's path. She hit the brakes, but with her hands frozen to the wheel, she couldn't steer. The truck slowed but didn't stop, rolling inexorably toward the figure. As Dakota got closer, she saw it was a woman, completely covered in ice, so thick that only her general shape was human. The ice woman raised one crystalline arm and pointed directly at Dakota. The whispers became a roar. "Join us. Feel the cold. Become the cold. The ice storm never ends for those who understand. We are the storm now. We are always falling, always accumulating, always spreading." Dakota screamed and her voice shattered the ice forming on her hands. The sound of breaking crystal filled the cab as she wrenched the wheel hard right, sending her truck onto the shoulder. She missed the ice woman by inches, catching a glimpse of the figure's face as she passed. It was her own face, older, frozen, staring back at her with ice-blue eyes that held terrible knowledge. The truck slid sideways, tipped, and Dakota thought she was going over. But the wheels caught traction on frozen gravel and the truck shuddered back onto all 18 wheels. The whispers cut off instantly like someone had flipped a switch. The heater suddenly kicked in properly, flooding the cab with warmth. The highway widened back to its normal dimensions, the forest retreating to its proper distance. Dakota pulled into a closed rest area 3 miles down the road and sat shaking for an hour. The ice on her hands had left marks, white patches on her skin that looked like frostbite but didn't hurt. They've never gone away. On cold days, they ache with a deep chill that seems to come from inside her bones. She still drives truck, but never through the Ottawa National Forest in winter. Other drivers have reported hearing whispers during ice storms on that stretch of Highway 2, and some have found their hands temporarily frozen to their steering wheels. The old-timers say the forest collected lost travelers for centuries, and the ice storms are how it remembers them, how it calls others to join the frozen congregation that exists somewhere between the falling rain and the ground below. Story number 3, The Mirror Road. Thomas Garrett had been driving overnight shifts for a food distribution company for 12 years, and he preferred them. Less traffic, better radio stations, and a solitude that suited his temperament. On December 3, 2018, he was hauling frozen goods from Minneapolis to Duluth on Interstate 35, a route he'd driven hundreds of times. The ice storm forecast had been downgraded to light freezing drizzle, not enough to concern someone with Thomas's experience. The drizzle started just south of Hinckley, so light it barely registered on his windshield. Thomas maintained his speed, watching the temperature gauge hover right around 32 degrees, the dangerous threshold where water becomes ice. Traffic was sparse, just a few cars scattered across the 3-hour drive. The clock on his dashboard read 2:47 a.m. when things began to go wrong. Thomas noticed a truck ahead of him, same make and model as his own, same white color scheme, even the same company logo. He found it odd, but not alarming. Plenty of drivers worked for the same outfit. But as he got closer, he saw the license plate. It was his license plate, the exact same number. He changed lanes to pull alongside the truck, intending to get a look at the driver. The other truck matched his movement perfectly, staying exactly parallel to him. Thomas accelerated. So did the other truck. He slowed down. It slowed down. They were synchronized, moving as one unit despite being two separate vehicles. Thomas grabbed his phone to document this impossibility. In the screen's reflection, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice water. The truck beside him was reversed. Everything was backwards, mirror image, like he was looking at his own truck reflected in glass. But there was no glass. It was solid, real, driving next to him on the highway. The driver's face turned toward him. It was his own face, but wrong. The features were inverted, left-right flipped. and the expression was something Thomas had never worn in his life. Pure, absolute terror. The mirror, Thomas was screaming silently behind the glass of his cab, mouth open wide, hands beating against the windows. Thomas swerved away, putting distance between himself and the impossible truck. It matched his movement again, maintaining the parallel position. He tried to brake, but the mirror truck stayed locked beside him. The freezing drizzle was intensifying now, coating everything in a thin, transparent layer of ice. Thomas realized the ice was creating a reflective surface on the highway, and something was crossing over through it. More mirror trucks appeared, behind him, ahead of him, filling the highway with reversed versions of his vehicle. Each one contained a driver who looked like Thomas, and each one was expressing a different stage of panic and despair. Some were crying. Some were beating their heads against their steering wheels. One was writing something on his windshield in what looked like blood, backwards letters that Thomas could almost read. The highway itself began to change. The southbound lanes he was driving appeared to be reflecting up onto the northbound side, creating an impossible vertical wall of road on his left with vehicles driving sideways, perpendicular to gravity. Thomas could see their headlights, see the drivers inside, all of them mirror versions of people, all of them trapped in the reflected world. His CB radio came alive with his own voice, but the words were backwards, playing in reverse. Thomas grabbed the microphone and spoke. "What's happening? What is this?" The voice on the radio responded now in proper forward speech. "You're crossing over. The ice is a mirror. You've been driving on the reflection for the last 30 miles. You're on the wrong side, the mirror side. We're all stuck here. All the versions of ourselves that split off with every decision. We're the roads not taken." Thomas looked at his GPS. It showed him driving in the opposite direction, northbound instead of southbound, and his position was flickering between 2 points 40 miles apart. The road signs he passed showed distances increasing instead of decreasing, numbers climbing as he drove forward. Mile marker 175, mile marker 182, mile marker 194. He was moving away from his destination even as he drove toward it. The ice on the highway was now thick enough to show clear reflections. Thomas could see through it into the road beneath, where the real highway existed. He saw a single truck, his truck, driving normally with no mirror vehicles around it. That was the real Thomas, still in the actual world, unaware that a version of himself had split off into the reflection. He had to get back. Thomas jerked the wheel hard, trying to crash through the barrier between reflection and reality. His truck skidded on the ice, spinning in a complete circle, then another, then another. The world became a blur of lights and darkness, mirror trucks and real highway mixing together. Thomas felt himself fragmenting, splitting into more versions, each one taking a different possible path through the spin. The truck stopped. Thomas sat gasping, parked on the shoulder of I-35. His GPS showed the correct position, driving southbound. The clock read 2:54 a.m. Only 7 minutes had passed, but Thomas felt like he'd been driving for hours. The ice storm had ended, leaving just a thin glaze on the road. There were no other trucks around him, no mirror vehicles, no impossible reflected highways. But Thomas knows he didn't make it back. Not really. He's a reflection now, one of the split-off versions driving the mirror roads. Sometimes he sees the other versions of himself, all the Thomas Garretts that took different turns, made different choices. They're all driving the same routes, forever separated by the thin ice of possibility. The real Thomas, the original one, is still out there somewhere. Or maybe he's a reflection too, maybe they all are. In the mirror world, there's no way to tell which side is real and which is the reflection. Story number 4. The Checkpoint. Raymond Holloway was an independent owner-operator hauling whatever loads he could get through the winter months when work was scarce. On February 22, 2020, he picked up a mysterious contract through a broker, transporting sealed containers from Detroit to Chicago. The pay was excellent, the route straightforward, and Raymond didn't ask questions about cargo that wasn't his business. The ice storm hit just as he crossed into Indiana on I-94. Weather radar showed a narrow band of freezing precipitation, maybe 30 miles wide, something he could push through in 40 minutes if he maintained speed. Raymond had chains on his drives and enough weight in the trailer to keep traction. He'd handled worse. The ice started falling hard around 11 p.m. Within minutes, visibility dropped to near zero. Raymond slowed to 30 miles per hour, following the faint glow of the lane markers. The highway was empty, which struck him as odd. Usually during ice storms, you'd see other trucks crawling along, safety in numbers, but Raymond was completely alone. That's when he saw the checkpoint ahead. Orange cones funneled traffic into a single lane, and bright floodlights illuminated what looked like a temporary inspection station. 3 figures in heavy winter gear stood in the road, one holding a red light wand, directing Raymond to stop. He didn't remember seeing any notification about checkpoints on this route, and the timing seemed bizarre given the dangerous conditions. Raymond brought his truck to a stop. One of the figures approached his driver's side door. Something about the walk was wrong, too smooth, like gliding rather than stepping. Raymond rolled down his window, ice-cold air rushing in. The figure looked up at him, and Raymond's stomach lurched. The face inside the hood was partially transparent, features visible but somehow insubstantial, like looking at someone through frosted glass. "Cargo inspection," the figure said, its voice oddly flat, emotionless. "Need to verify your load." Raymond's throat tightened. "Sealed containers, I don't have access, broker orders." The figure tilted its head at an unnatural angle, almost 90 degrees. "We need to see inside. New regulations, ice storm protocols." Something about this was fundamentally wrong. Raymond had been through hundreds of legitimate inspections over his career. This wasn't one of them. The other 2 figures were now circling his truck, not walking but moving in a way that left no footprints in the accumulating ice. They seemed to float slightly above the ground. "I'm going to need to see identification," Raymond said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Official documentation for this checkpoint." The figure at his window reached up with one hand. The fingers were too long, too many joints, and ended in points that scraped against his door with a sound like ice breaking. "You don't understand. This isn't about regulations. This is about what you're carrying, what you agreed to transport. The seals can't be broken from your side, but they can be broken from ours." Raymond hit the gas. His truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the ice before catching. He heard something slam against his trailer, a boom that resonated through the entire rig. In his side mirror, he saw the 3 figures standing motionless in the road, watching him go. They didn't chase. They didn't need to. The banging started 2 miles down the highway. Something inside his trailer, something that had been quiet for 6 hours, was now trying to get out. The impacts came in rhythm, boom, 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 each one stronger than the last. Raymond's trailer shook with each blow. Whatever was in those sealed containers was waking up, and it was angry. His CB radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was the same flat, emotionless tone from the checkpoint. "You were supposed to stop. We were supposed to contain it before it fully thawed. The ice keeps it dormant. The storm was the containment system. But you kept driving, and now it's warming up. It's waking up, and there's no checkpoint ahead to stop it." Raymond checked his trailer temperature monitor. The refrigeration unit was working perfectly, maintaining -10 degrees. But the interior temperature reading was climbing. -5, 0, 5 degrees. Rising steadily despite the cooling system running at maximum capacity. Whatever was in there was generating its own heat. The banging became a scraping sound, metal being torn from inside. Raymond saw his trailer doors buckling, warping outward. Something massive was pressing against them. He pushed his truck faster, reaching 60 miles per hour on the ice-covered highway. A suicidal speed, but better than stopping to face whatever was emerging from his cargo. A rest area appeared ahead, lights blazing in the darkness. Raymond saw trucks parked there, other drivers weathering the storm. He aimed for it, hoping for safety in numbers, hoping that whatever was behind him couldn't reach him around witnesses. He pulled into the lot, wheels locked in a sliding stop, and jumped from his cab. The trailer doors were intact, undamaged. The banging had stopped. Raymond ran to the back, expecting to find torn metal, expecting to see something nightmare crawling out. The seals were unbroken. The temperature gauge read -10 degrees, exactly where it should be. The entire incident might never have happened. But the other drivers in the rest area were staring at him with expressions of pity and fear. An older man approached, shaking his head. "You saw the checkpoint, didn't you? The ice checkpoint." Raymond nodded, unable to speak. The old driver sighed deeply. "They weren't inspectors. They were trying to save you. That route during ice storms, it crosses through a thin place. Temperature drops enough, reality gets fragile. Things that are sealed away in frozen storage, they're not just cargo, they're prisoners. The ice keeps them locked in. The checkpoint was the boundary. By running it, you accepted the cargo as yours. It's bound to you now." Raymond drove the load to Chicago, delivered the containers, and collected his pay. He never found out what was inside. The broker vanished, number disconnected, address non-existent. But sometimes, during ice storms, Raymond hears the banging from the trailer he no longer owns. He feels something following him, patient and cold, waiting for the next time conditions are right, waiting for the next thin place. The checkpoint appears in his dreams, those translucent figures still standing there, still waiting to inspect cargo that should never be allowed to thaw. He drives past them every night in his sleep, running the checkpoint over and over, never learning, never able to stop. Story number 5, The Frozen Frequency. Yolanda Reeves had been a long-haul driver for 19 years, and she'd developed habits that kept her safe and sane through long nights on empty roads. One of those habits was listening to AM radio, the old-school channels that played classic country and took call-ins from truckers across the nation. On the night of January 17, 2022, hauling electronics from Boston to Buffalo, Yolanda was scanning through the AM band during an ice storm when she found a frequency that shouldn't exist. It was just below the bottom of the band, somewhere around 520 kilohertz, a space where stations weren't supposed to broadcast. The signal was crystal clear despite the ice storm that was coating everything in a quarter-inch shell. A man's voice, calm and professional like a traffic reporter. "Attention all drivers on Interstate 90 eastbound. Be advised, a frozen vehicle blocking right lane at mile marker 178. Estimated time to reach this location, 14 minutes. Yolanda checked her GPS. She was on I-90 eastbound, currently passing mile marker 164. At her reduced ice storm speed, she'd reach mile marker 178 in about 14 minutes. The accuracy was unsettling. She keyed up her CB, asking if anyone else was hearing the broadcast. Static. Every channel was dead except for this one impossible frequency on her AM radio. The voice continued. "Driver Yolanda Reeves, Kenworth W900L, cargo electronics, destination Buffalo, current speed 28 miles per hour. Hazard ahead. Recommended action? Reduce speed to 15 miles per hour in 300 yards. Yolanda's hands went numb. The broadcast knew her name, knew her truck, knew her cargo. She looked around the cab like someone might be hiding there, watching her. The ice continued falling, each frozen drop ticking against her windshield like a countdown. The voice had said 300 yards. A sign appeared in her headlights. Mile marker 165, 500 yards. She slowed down, more from fear than obedience. The voice spoke again. Confirmed compliance. Yolanda Reeves reducing speed. This will add 4 minutes to your arrival at hazard site. Time to mile marker 178 now 18 minutes. The frozen vehicle will still be there. They don't move anymore. Who is this? Yolanda shouted at her radio. How do you know my name? The voice paused, and in that pause, Yolanda heard something underneath the broadcast. Thousands of other voices all speaking at once, a vast chorus of overlapping words. Then the main voice returned. We are the frozen frequency. We are every driver who stopped during an ice storm and never started again. We see all roads simultaneously. We exist in the ice that connects every highway, every path, every frozen moment. We're trying to help you avoid joining us. Mile marker 170 passed. The ice storm intensified, the freezing rain now mixed with sleet that rattled against her truck's metal surfaces. The temperature dropped to 28 degrees, then 26. Yolanda's heater struggled to keep up. The voice on the radio began listing coordinates, speeds, distances with mechanical precision. Current position 42.8756 north, 78.6543 west. Barometric pressure dropping. Ice accumulation rate increasing to 0.4 inches per hour. Your truck's alternator will fail in 32 minutes. You need to stop before that happens. My alternator's fine, Yolanda protested. The gauges are normal. The ice gets into everything, the voice replied. It's already in your electrical system. You can't see it yet, but we can see it. We see everything that's frozen and everything that will freeze. You need to stop at mile marker 175 at the emergency turnout. It's the only safe place for the next 40 miles. Yolanda didn't want to stop. Stopping in an ice storm felt like death, like giving up. But the voice had been right about everything else. Mile marker 172 appeared, then 173. The turnout at 175 would be visible soon. She had to decide whether to trust a mysterious broadcast from an impossible frequency, or to trust her own experience and push through. The decision was made for her. Her headlights dimmed, flickered, then brightened again. The voltage gauge dropped sharply. The alternator warning light glowed red on her dashboard. 32 minutes, the voice had said. It had been 6 minutes since that prediction. The alternator was failing exactly as forecast. Yolanda pulled into the emergency turnout at mile marker 175. The moment she stopped, every light in her truck died. Electrical system completely gone. Battery drained instantly by whatever the ice had done to her wiring. She sat in complete darkness, only the faint green glow of her radio's frequency display showing that impossible station number 520 kHz. The voice spoke one more time. You've stopped in the safe zone. This location has been maintained by previous travelers. You'll find supplies in the emergency box 50 yards ahead on the right. Stay in the box until the ice storm passes. Do not attempt to walk to your truck. Do not answer if you hear your name called. The ice creates echoes of people, and those echoes are not your friends. We'll keep broadcasting to you. We'll let you know when it's safe. Yolanda grabbed her flashlight and winter gear. The flashlight worked on batteries, unaffected by whatever had killed her truck's electrical system. She found the emergency box exactly where the voice said it would be, an old military surplus container anchored to the ground. Inside were blankets, food, water, a camp stove, and a battery-powered radio already tuned to 520 kHz. She spent 9 hours in that box while the ice storm raged outside. The voice on the radio narrated everything happening on the highway. Vehicles sliding off the road, other drivers stopping in dangerous locations, some being rescued by state police, others just waiting. And some, the voice said in its emotionless tone, joining the frozen frequency forever. The woman in the red Honda at mile marker 182 has been stationary for 45 minutes, engine still running. She's been dead for 30 minutes. Carbon monoxide. The ice sealed her exhaust. We tried to warn her, but her radio was on FM. We can only reach the AM band. She's joining us now. We can hear her starting to transmit. Dawn came, and with it, the ice storm ended. Yolanda's truck needed a complete electrical system replacement, but she was alive. The emergency services found her in the box, confused about how she'd known to stop there. No such emergency supply boxes were officially maintained on that stretch of highway, they told her. Must have been left by Good Samaritans. Yolanda still drives, but she keeps her radio tuned to 520 kHz during every ice storm. She hears the voice, hears the warnings, and she stops when told to stop. Sometimes she hears new voices join the broadcast, other drivers joining the frozen frequency. They're all trying to help, all trying to save others from their fate. They exist in the ice itself, in the frozen water that covers the roads, transmitted through the crystalline structure that connects every storm, every highway, every moment when water turns to ice. They're always there, always broadcasting, trying to guide the living away from becoming the frozen dead. Story number 6. The Thaw. Mitchell Santos was a dedicated night driver for a medical supply company transporting temperature-sensitive equipment between hospitals across the Midwest. On March 3, 2021, he was running his usual route from Kansas City to Des Moines when a late-season ice storm caught him near the Iowa border. These March storms were tricky, temperatures hovering right at the freezing point, creating unpredictable conditions. Mitchell watched his exterior temperature gauge fluctuate, 34 degrees, then 31, then 33, dancing around the crucial 32-degree threshold. The precipitation couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Rain one minute, ice the next. The highway surface was slick but not yet coated, dangerous but passable. Mitchell maintained a careful 40 miles per hour, focused on the road. That's when he noticed the people thawing out of the ice. At first, Mitchell thought they were normal pedestrians impossibly standing on the highway shoulder during an ice storm. But as his headlights swept across them, he saw the truth. They weren't standing on the shoulder. They were emerging from the ice itself, pulling themselves out of the frozen surface like it was water. Their bodies were coated in crystalline shells that cracked and fell away as they moved. Mitchell counted 6 of them spaced along a quarter-mile stretch. They turned to watch him pass, their movements jerky, uncertain, like they were remembering how bodies worked. Their faces were blue-white, frost patterns visible on their skin even as the ice melted away. They began walking toward the highway, toward Mitchell's truck. He accelerated, tires losing traction, briefly before catching. In his side mirror, Mitchell saw more figures emerging. Dozens now pulling themselves from the ice-covered ground, from the frozen trees, from the very air itself where the freezing rain fell. They were all walking in the same direction, following his truck, moving faster than people should be able to move. Mitchell's CB radio burst to life with overlapping distress calls. "They're thawing out, oh God, they're thawing and they're hungry. Been frozen for months, maybe years. They're looking for... Don't let them touch you. Their skin is still frozen. They'll pull the heat right out of..." The figures were gaining ground. Mitchell pushed his speed up to 55, dangerous on the slick highway, but necessary. He could see them in his mirrors now, running with impossible speed, their frozen bodies somehow moving faster as they thawed. The temperature gauge climbed to 36 degrees. The ice storm was ending, transforming into cold rain, and with every degree of warmth, the thawing figures moved faster. One of them reached his trailer, hands slapping against the metal. Mitchell felt the impact reverberate through his entire rig. More hands joined the first, dozens of frozen people clinging to his truck, pulling themselves along its length, climbing toward his cab. Their touch left frost patterns on the metal, even as the air temperature rose above freezing. Mitchell grabbed his phone to call 911, but the screen showed no signal. Instead, a text message appeared from no number. They're not alive, they're not dead. They're the in-between. People who died in ice storms, frozen so quickly their last moments got trapped in the ice. Every time it thaws, they thaw too. They're looking for the warmth they lost. They'll drain you to nothing trying to feel warm again. A face appeared at Mitchell's driver's side window. A woman, maybe 30 years old, frost in her hair, lips blue, eyes desperate. She mouthed words. So cold, please. So cold. Her hand touched the window and ice spread from the contact point, fractal patterns racing across the glass despite the warm rain now falling. Mitchell cranked his heater to maximum and aimed it at the driver's side window. The ice melted, but the woman's hand remained pressed to the glass. More figures climbed onto his hood, 3 of them blocking his view. Their weight made his truck's front end sink, handling becoming dangerous. They stared at him through the windshield, hands pressed to the glass, mouths forming the same words. So cold. The highway ahead began to glow with emergency lights. A roadblock, state police, flares burning in the rain. Mitchell honked his horn repeatedly as he approached, hoping they would see his situation. Officers were waving him through, directing him into a wide opening in the blockade. As Mitchell passed through, he saw massive heated lamps set up, industrial equipment pumping warm air across the highway. The thawing figures released his truck simultaneously, dropping away as he entered the heated zone. They couldn't tolerate the warmth. Mitchell watched in his mirrors as they retreated, diving back into the cold rain, dissolving into the water, becoming ice particles again. The officers were corralling them with heated air, forcing them back, containing them within a perimeter. Mitchell was directed to a staging area where other trucks had been stopped. A state police sergeant approached his window. You encountered the thaw event, 4th one this winter. We've been tracking them, trying to manage them. Every time we get an ice storm followed by rapid warming, they emerge. People who froze to death on this highway over the past 50 years. Something about the quick freeze preserves them in the ice itself. When it thaws fast, they come back for a little while. What are you doing with them? Mitchell asked, his voice shaking. Heating lamps keep them at bay until the temperature stabilizes. Once it's consistently above 40 degrees for a few hours, they dissipate completely. They can only exist during the thaw, during the transition between frozen and not. It's like they're caught in that moment, unable to move forward into death or back into life. Mitchell was held at the staging area for 3 hours while the heated perimeter maintained until dawn. As the sun rose and temperatures climbed into the mid-40s, the sergeant told him it was safe to continue. The thaw event had ended. The in-between people had dissolved back into memory and water. Mitchell completed his delivery, but he put in his resignation 2 weeks later. He couldn't drive through ice storms anymore, couldn't watch the temperature gauge hover around 32 degrees without thinking about all those people trapped in the ice, waiting for the thaw. Desperate for warmth they would never truly feel. On cold nights, he still sees their faces pressed against his window, still hears their silent pleas. And every spring, when the ice melts and the news reports unusual phenomena on Midwestern highways, Mitchell knows the thaw events are happening again, releasing those frozen moments of death back into the living world for brief, desperate periods before the warmth takes them away completely. Story number 7. The Identical Storm. Francis Webb had been driving commercial trucks for 22 years, and he prided himself on keeping meticulous records. Every trip logged, every fuel stop documented, every weather condition noted. On November 11, 2019, he was hauling auto parts from Cleveland to Pittsburgh a route he'd driven 37 times according to his records. An ice storm warning was posted, but Francis had been through worse. The storm hit around 8 p.m. on Interstate 76, freezing rain coating everything in minutes. Francis documented the time, the mile marker, the temperature, just like he always did. 76 exits from Cleveland, mile marker, 34, temperature dropping to 30 degrees. He noted the positions of other vehicles, a red pickup 2 miles ahead, a Honda sedan behind him, a FedEx truck in the opposite lane. The ice intensified. Francis reduced his speed, documenting the change. 8:14 p.m., speed reduced to 25 miles per hour. He passed an accident scene, 2 cars in the median, emergency vehicles already present. Francis made a note. 8:22 p.m., mile marker 41, accident with police response. At 8:30 p.m., Francis experienced something impossible. He passed the same accident scene again. Same 2 cars, same position, same emergency vehicles with lights flashing in the same pattern. Mile marker 41, but he'd already passed mile marker 41 8 minutes ago. He should be at mile marker 49 by now, not seeing the same location again. Francis grabbed his logbook, checking his previous entry. There it was. 8:22 p.m., mile marker 41, accident. He looked at his GPS. It showed his position at mile marker 41. He'd somehow gone backwards without turning around, without reversing, without any sensation of changing direction. The red pickup was still 2 miles ahead. The Honda sedan was still behind him. The FedEx truck passed in the opposite lane at exactly 8:31 p.m., just like before. The ice storm continued in exactly the same pattern. Francis documented everything with growing unease. 8:35 p.m., temperature drops to 28 degrees. 8:40 p.m., ice accumulation reaches 1/4 inch. Every measurement matched his previous records perfectly. He was living the same 8-minute period on repeat. At 8:30 p.m., he passed the accident scene again. Same position, same vehicles, same emergency responders who seemed locked in identical movements. Francis tried to break the pattern. He changed lanes, accelerated, did everything different from his previous loop. But at 8:30 p.m., he passed mile marker 41, the accident scene, and the FedEx truck. The loop was absolute. His CB radio provided no help. Every transmission was the same. Ice storm conditions, reduce speed, exercise caution. The same voice, the same words repeated precisely every 8 minutes. Francis tried calling for help on his phone, but the calls wouldn't connect. The screen showed the time updating normally, but the minute the clock hit 8:30 p.m., everything reset to 8:22 p.m. Francis started counting the loops. 13 times through the same 8 minutes. He watched the accident scene pass 13 times, the emergency responders forever trapped in the same moment of response. On the 14th loop, Francis tried to stop his truck before reaching mile marker 41, hoping to break the cycle by avoiding the accident scene. But when he pressed his brakes, nothing happened. The truck continued at the same speed, his foot pushing the pedal with no effect. He was no longer controlling his vehicle. The loop was controlling him. Panic set in during the 17th loop. Francis screamed at his radio, at his phone, at the windshield, hoping someone would hear him. But he was alone, trapped in a frozen moment that repeated eternally. The ice storm wasn't moving forward, it was locked in place, and Francis was locked with it, documenting the same observations over and over in his logbook. He started noticing details he'd missed before. The people in the crashed cars weren't moving. They were frozen mid-motion, a woman's hand raised toward the window, a man's head turned at an unnatural angle. The emergency responders were posed like mannequins, forever reaching toward victims they would never save. Even the falling ice was the same, each raindrop following the same path down his windshield. On the 32nd loop, Francis saw other trucks appearing in the ice storm, drivers he didn't recognize but who were clearly experiencing the same trap. Their faces showed the same terror and confusion. Some were crying. Some were banging on their windows. All of them were passing mile marker 41 at exactly 8:30 p.m., locked in their own 8-minute segments of frozen time. Francis lost count after 60 loops. Time had no meaning anymore when it only moved in circles. He stopped documenting in his logbook. What was the point of recording the same moment infinitely? He sat numb, watching the loop repeat, waiting for something, anything to change. The change came without warning. On what Francis thought might be the 73rd loop, the ice storm ended, not gradually but instantly. One moment he was at mile marker 37 with freezing rain falling. The next moment he was at mile marker 63 with clear skies. The clock read 11:47 p.m. 3 hours had passed in the outside world, but Francis had lived the same 8 minutes on repeat for an eternity. He pulled into the first truck stop he found and checked his logbook. 73 identical entries for the same 8-minute period, all in his handwriting, undeniable proof that he hadn't imagined it. The accident at mile marker 41 had happened. State police confirmed it when Francis asked. 2 people had died in that crash during an ice storm. They died at exactly 8:30 p.m. Francis researched the phenomenon, finding obscure accounts of time loops during severe weather events. Some physicists theorized that ice storms created temporal distortions, the freezing water somehow crystallizing time itself, trapping moments in repeating patterns. Francis didn't know if that was true, but he knew what he'd experienced. He still drives, still keeps meticulous records. But sometimes during ice storms, Francis sees his clock hit 8:22 p.m. and he braces himself, wondering if this is the storm that will trap him again, if this time he'll be stuck in the loop forever. His logbook has a section in the back marked Repeating Events, where he documents suspected loops. There are 14 entries so far, incidents where time seemed to stutter, where 8 minutes felt like 8 hours. Francis believes there are places where ice storms have created permanent time traps, locations where drivers are still looping through the same moments, documenting the same mile markers, passing the same accidents, forever frozen in time's crystal prison. Story number 8, The Frozen Cargo. Elizabeth Park was a specialized hauler transporting high-value cargo that required constant temperature monitoring. On February the 9th, 2023, she picked up a shipment from a pharmaceutical research facility in Rochester, New York, bound for a laboratory in Erie, Pennsylvania. The cargo manifest listed the contents as biological samples, and Elizabeth had transported similar loads dozens of times. This one felt different from the moment it was loaded. The containers were larger than usual, coffin-sized units with internal refrigeration systems independent of her trailer's cooling. The loading crew worked in absolute silence, their faces hidden behind full containment suits. They made Elizabeth sign 7 different liability waivers and gave her explicit instructions. Maintain exterior temperature below 28 degrees. Do not inspect the cargo. Do not stop except for emergencies. Complete the delivery within 4 hours. Elizabeth departed at 6 p.m. just as an ice storm warning was issued for the entire route. Perfect timing, she thought. The freezing temperatures would help maintain the cargo's requirements. The storm hit hard and fast, coating the highway in ice within 20 minutes. Elizabeth didn't mind. Her truck was equipped for winter conditions and the ice would keep everything cold. The first anomaly occurred 30 minutes into the drive. Her trailer temperature monitor showed the independent containers were drawing enormous amounts of power, far more than biological samples should require. Elizabeth checked the gauge multiple times, thinking it was malfunctioning. The containers were maintaining a temperature of negative 80 degrees, cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide solid. Then she heard the sounds from her trailer. Not the normal creaks and groans of a truck in motion, but rhythmic thuds like something knocking from inside the containers. Elizabeth told herself it was the refrigeration compressors cycling, ice expanding and contracting. But the rhythm was too regular, too purposeful. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. Like someone trying to get her attention. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Elizabeth answered using her Bluetooth headset. A voice, digitally distorted, spoke with urgency. "Driver Park, you need to increase your speed. The cargo must remain below -80 degrees. The ice storm is not sufficient. The exterior temperature is too warm." "I'm going as fast as I can in these conditions," Elizabeth replied. "Who is this?" "You don't understand. What you're transporting isn't dead. It's dormant. The cold keeps it dormant. If it warms up past the threshold, it will wake, and you don't want to be in that truck. When it does..." The call disconnected. Elizabeth checked her trailer temperature. The containers were still at -80, but the power draw was increasing, the refrigeration systems working harder to maintain the temperature. Outside, the ice storm was weakening. The temperature was climbing from 26 degrees to 29. The knocking became pounding. Elizabeth felt each impact through her seat, through the steering wheel, through every part of her truck. Something massive was hitting the inside of those containers, hitting them with enough force to rock her entire trailer. She glanced at her side mirror and saw frost patterns forming on the exterior of her trailer. Impossible, intricate designs that spread across the metal surface like living things. Her temperature alarm sounded. The containers had risen to -78 degrees, 2 degrees of warming, but it was enough. The pounding intensified, and Elizabeth heard something else. Cracking. Not ice cracking, but metal. The containers were failing. A rest area appeared ahead. Emergency services vehicles parked with lights flashing. They were waiting for her. Elizabeth pulled in, and immediately a team of people in containment suits surrounded her truck. They attached heavy cables to her trailer, connecting to mobile generators. The trailer's power draw stabilized, the temperature dropping back to -80. A woman in a suit approached Elizabeth's cab, her voice muffled through the helmet. "You did well keeping it cold. We almost lost containment. Do you know what you were transporting?" Elizabeth shook her head. The woman gestured toward the trailer. "Biological samples, technically accurate. Specifically, organisms recovered from glacial ice cores, frozen for approximately 40,000 years. They were dormant when we found them, and they'll stay dormant as long as we keep them cold enough. But they're aware. They know they're being transported, and they're very, very good at manipulating temperature." "What happens if they wake up?" Elizabeth asked. The woman was quiet for a moment. "There's a reason ice ages happened. There's a reason the planet goes through cycles of deep freezing. These organisms, when active, they spread cold. They convert heat energy into ice. They're thermovorous, if you want the technical term. They eat warmth. A single container, if breached at above threshold temperature, could trigger an ice age in a regional area within days." Elizabeth watched as the team worked on her trailer, reinforcing the containers, adding redundant cooling systems. They were taking no chances. The woman continued. "The ice storm wasn't coincidental, they call them. When they're being transported, they influence atmospheric conditions to create the cold they need. This storm appeared specifically along your route because they willed it into existence. The cargo was eventually transferred to a more secure transport system, a military convoy with mobile cryo chambers. Elizabeth was paid triple her normal rate and asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She agreed, happy to be free of the responsibility. But the ice storms followed her. Every route Elizabeth drove that winter, freezing precipitation appeared. Not normal storms, but precise bands of ice that formed around her truck, maintaining temperatures in the mid-20s regardless of surrounding conditions. Other drivers reported seeing localized ice clouds following Elizabeth's truck, moving against the wind, depositing frost on roads that had been clear moments before. Elizabeth realized the truth during a delivery in March, when spring temperatures should have ended winter weather. A small ice storm formed directly above her truck, following her like a personal cloud, keeping her cargo area cold. She wasn't transporting the frozen organisms anymore, but they'd marked her somehow, recognized her as a suitable host for their cold. She consulted with a specialist from the original research facility, a woman who studied the organisms. The explanation was unsettling. They're not malicious, but they're opportunistic. You kept them cold, saved them from waking prematurely. They've bonded with you in their way. They'll keep you cold now, keep any cargo you transport frozen. You're essentially a mobile ice age. The good news is they're protecting you. Nothing that needs warmth will bother you. The bad news is you'll never be warm again. Elizabeth still drives, still hauls refrigerated cargo. She's the most reliable cold chain transporter in the industry because her loads never warm up, not even a single degree. But she wears 3 layers even in summer, and her cab's heater runs constantly just to maintain a temperature above freezing inside. The ice storms are her constant companions, personal weather systems that follow her truck across every highway, leaving trails of frost in her wake. Other drivers avoid her on the roads, superstitious about the unnatural cold that surrounds her. Elizabeth has accepted her fate. She's become a vessel for ancient cold, a human glacier moving through the modern world, forever transporting the frozen things that should never thaw. Story number 9, The Bridge of Ice. Samuel Torres had been a bridge specialist for most of his driving career, transporting heavy equipment across the country with particular expertise in winter conditions. Bridges freeze before roads, and Samuel had logged over 1 million miles of experience handling that dangerous transition. On January 25, 2020, he was crossing the high bridge over the Ohio River, hauling construction equipment from Louisville to Cincinnati, when an ice storm struck with unusual suddenness. The bridge was 3 miles long, suspended high above the freezing water. Samuel was halfway across when the ice began to fall. Within seconds, the entire span was coated. His speed dropped to a crawl, all 18, wheels struggling for traction on the frozen metal deck. The GPS showed his position in the middle of the bridge, but when Samuel looked ahead, he couldn't see the far side. The ice storm had become so intense that visibility extended only to the next suspension tower, maybe 500 feet. Samuel's trailer began to fishtail. He corrected carefully, avoiding the absolute braking that would send him spinning. The trailer straightened, but Samuel realized with horror that he'd lost all forward motion. His wheels were spinning uselessly on the ice. The truck was stationary, stuck in the middle of the bridge with no way to gain traction. The temperature dropped suddenly, his gauge falling from 32 degrees to 20, then to 10. Samuel's breath fogged thick in the cab despite the heater running full blast. The ice on his windshield thickened, becoming opaque, blocking his view entirely. He was trapped in a metal box on a frozen bridge with zero visibility. That's when the bridge began to change. Samuel felt it in his gut first, a sensation of wrongness, like the solid structure beneath him had become uncertain. He opened his door, needing to see what was happening, and nearly fell out. The bridge deck had transformed. Instead of metal grating and concrete, Samuel was looking at pure ice, translucent and deep. He could see through it to the river far below, but the river was wrong. It wasn't flowing. The water was frozen in mid-current, waves and eddies preserved in perfect crystal detail. The suspension cables were now made of ice, massive frozen ropes thick as tree trunks extending up into the storm. The towers had become ice sculptures, geometric and impossible. Samuel was no longer on the Ohio River bridge he'd crossed hundreds of times. He was on some other bridge, Some ice bridge that existed in the same location but in a different reality. A figure walked toward him through the ice storm. Samuel couldn't tell if it was approaching from ahead or behind. Distance had become confused. The figure resolved into a man wearing a trucker's jacket from the 1970s based on the style. The man waved, friendly, unconcerned about the impossible conditions. "Welcome to the bridge," the man said, his voice clear despite the wind. "You're stuck like the rest of us. Ice got too thick, traction disappeared, and the transition happened. Don't worry, you get used to it." Samuel's mind refused to process this. Transition to what? Where are we? Same place we've always been. The bridge over the Ohio. But the ice storm created a version that exists between the normal world and the frozen world. We're on the ice bridge now. Time works different here. You could be here for years or maybe just seconds pass outside. No way to tell, really. The man gestured behind him and Samuel saw more trucks, dozens of them stretching back into the ice storm. All stuck, all frozen in place on the ice bridge. Some looked decades old, styling, from the 1960s and 70s. Others were modern 21st century rigs, all trapped in the same impossible moment. The thing about ice bridges, the man continued, is they're stable as long as the ice storm continues. But when it ends, when the thaw comes, the bridge melts. Everything on it falls to the frozen river below. We've been waiting for the thaw for a long time. Some of us want it to come. Some of us are terrified of it. Because we don't know if we'll fall, or if we'll wake up in the normal world, or if something else entirely will happen. Samuel looked at his truck, at the ice encasing everything. How do I get off this bridge? You don't. You wait. The ice bridge decides when to release people, if it releases them at all. I've been here since 1977, February ice storm, same as yours. 43 years for me, though people outside probably think I disappeared 43 minutes ago. Or 43 seconds. Like I said, time works different. Other drivers emerged from their trucks, approaching Samuel with expressions of resignation. They shared their stories. A woman who'd been trapped since 1983, a young man from 2015, an elderly driver who remembered the bridge being built in the 1960s. They were all living in the frozen moment between ice and thaw, trapped on a structure that existed in probability rather than physical reality. Samuel spent what felt like weeks on the ice bridge. He had supplies in his truck, food and water that never depleted no matter how much he consumed. The ice storm never intensified or diminished, maintaining a constant level of frozen precipitation. The other drivers had created a community, sharing meals, telling stories, keeping each other sane in the endless winter. Then, without warning, Samuel felt warmth. Real warmth, the first he'd experienced since entering the ice bridge. The temperature gauge climbed to 35 degrees. The ice storm was ending. The other drivers panicked, running to their trucks, some embracing, preparing for whatever came next. The ice bridge began to crack. Samuel heard it first, deep booming sounds like artillery, the frozen structure fracturing from stress. The translucent deck split into sections, and Samuel saw the frozen river below beginning to flow again, time restarting, physics reasserting itself. The bridge was collapsing. Samuel felt his truck falling, the sickening sensation of free fall. He closed his eyes, waiting for the impact with the river. But the impact never came. Samuel opened his eyes and found himself parked on the shoulder of the Ohio River Bridge, normal metal and concrete beneath his wheels. Emergency vehicles surrounded him, paramedics checking his condition. "Sir, can you hear me?" A paramedic's face appeared at his window. "You've been sitting here unresponsive for about 30 seconds. We saw you stop and came to check. Are you having a medical emergency?" 30 seconds. Samuel had spent weeks on the ice. Bridge met drivers who'd been trapped for decades, lived through the collapse of an impossible structure. 30 seconds had passed in the real world. The paramedics found nothing wrong with him physically, cleared him to continue his journey. But Samuel knows what he experienced was real. He has memories of those weeks, knows the names of the other drivers, remembers their stories. Sometimes during ice storms, Samuel sees them again, ghost trucks flickering in and out of visibility on bridges across the country. They're still there, still trapped on ice bridges that form whenever conditions are right, waiting for thaws that might release them or might drop them into frozen rivers that flow through other dimensions. Samuel doesn't cross bridges during ice storms anymore. He'll drive hundreds of miles out of his way to avoid them. Because he knows the truth. Every ice-covered bridge is potentially a doorway to that other place, that frozen probability space where time loops and physics fails. The ice bridge is always there, always waiting, ready to trap new drivers who make the mistake of stopping in the wrong place at the wrong moment. And someday Samuel fears he'll find himself back there permanently, joining the eternal convoy of frozen drivers who exist between thaw and freeze, forever suspended above rivers that never quite decide whether to flow